Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the LOE podcast. I'm your host, Carl Mentalis, otherwise known as Aidan. I'm going to be taking you through the D3 season review today. The D2 one came out last week, and no one could be bothered to do the other three divisions. So I'm taking over for the D3 one today. I was commentator for about a third of the season, alongside J. Cole and Dylan and a few others as well. Joining me today for the season review, we've got two drivers. We've got the first driver I'm going to introduce to you is Ivor. So Ivor, how are you doing?
Hello, how are you doing, bud?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Looking forward to going for the season.
Bet you are. Bet you are. Sound very enthusiastic. Yeah, and then the other driver, someone from the other side of the grid, actually, in the end. So second place in the championship in the end. He won Division 3.5, as everyone else in this is probably likes to call it. It's Iro Packer. How you doing, mate?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. Yeah, so just going to run everyone through as well how the review is going to work. We're not going to do a Gary and say that we're not doing a race by race review and do one. We're just going to come straight out and say that we're doing it race by race because it's easy. So that's how we're going to do it. It might be pretty boring for some people, and you may want to skip to the race that was good for you, but we're just going to do it a race by race season really and see what happened in each race, who shone, who faltered, and what happened championship wise, race by race really. And after that, we're just going to go through pretty much a roundup of the season, a roundup of maybe the top 5 drivers and their championship runs, and then we're just going to do a little thing at the end. We unfortunately didn't have anyone in D3. We didn't have anyone in D3 that could do the B Morgan strategy of getting a comment on every driver. But we're just going to go through pretty much every driver in D3 and get a strength and a weakness out of them really, and see in the season what their strength was and what their weaknesses were. So that's going to be how this is going to run. So coming into it, just overall D3 review, guys, from your perspective, I think is probably best to us because you're drivers. As Ethan starts playing something in the background.
Ignore that.
Oh god, this is going to be a mess. But just coming into the season, we've just got a couple of stats actually of people. I thought D2 had the most race winners actually. In the end, I think D3 had the most race winners. So D3 had 10 race winners in the end. So kind of from your perspectives, how did the season really look for you guys? How did it really go? I'd say what was kind of your perspective on the season?
Well, my perspective. Yeah, go on. I'll take the lead on this one. My perspective on it, it was incredibly competitive. I mean, this season, you've got to hand it to the Ogres that put the divs together because it was incredibly competitive, as you just said, with 10 different race winners. Like, it was one mistake, you're going to be fighting for the rest of your life trying to get back through. And that is a story for a lot of people in this season. One big mistake in the race cost them a lot of points in the championship, and that's just how competitive D3 was. Although it was a bit messy at times, I think I can honestly say that. And yeah, I mean, very competitive, but also quite messy.
Ethan, what was the season really for you from your perspective?
Basically the same as what Ivor said. It's just messy. If you make a mistake, then you're in the midfield. It's going to be a tough fight to get back through.
Yeah, absolutely. And another kind of thing for you, Ethan, as well. This is your first full season in LOE as well. So, kind of, what do you think you learned from your first full season? What can you take into your second one on the new game?
Well, especially I feel like this is just for any D3 driver. It's a learning experience because you have to learn how to race properly, I guess, to put it. It's very difficult in D3 because it's very competitive, super close, and then that just pushes people into mistakes, and you kind of have to learn how to deal with it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a really good way to summarize it, actually. So, yeah, so from those little season reviews, we're going to move on then to the first race of the championship, which was Australia. I think I'm going to let pretty much Ethan and Ivor take. Oh, by the way, Ethan's Packer. I'm going to name drop him constantly because I know him personally. So That's going to happen the entire
Already.
time.
It's already
Already,
come
I've said
out.
it like 4 or 5 times.
It's already come out.
It's already come out. I do it all the time. So if you're wondering who Ethan is, that's Packer. There you go. But I'm just going to let you guys take... I'm going to let, I think, probably Ivor take the reign really for Australia. Because obviously you know what happened. You were there for it. So kind of run us through what really happened for Australia. What was kind of the main takeaways from that race?
Australia, probably the crazy opening round that you can possibly get heavy rain at the start to intermediates later on. That really was a big way to start the season for a lot of guys in D3, because it was just a race of just survival, to be honest, in those conditions. And there were some who survived very well, like Bree. And then there were others who so well, like me and Velocity. But it was a from where I was, because I was relatively towards the back. I didn't see a lot of action myself, but it was just a race of, you just want to try and get it over and done with. First race of the season, you got to learn how everyone drives. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to actually learn how everyone drives, but yeah, it was just a race where you just got to survive it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was definitely looking at... We obviously chatting before. Obviously, we started the review. We were looking at the pre-season race as well. Coming into Australia, it looks like that. It looked like Eduk had the championship sewn up before we even came into Australia, didn't it? Because he waltzed really the pre-season race ahead of Ben JS. Did Eduk, and he was on pole as well in Australia in the dry by like 0.6 of a second, I think it was, in the end. So he got off to a brilliant start, but his race in the end in the wet conditions, he really fell by the wayside, and he ended up being the first person to retire. So just goes to show, really, doesn't it, how quickly things can change in D3, how Eduk in the space of about half an hour went from hero to zero by putting it on pole and then falling through the field and DNFing. So it just, really.
It makes me think whether or not he actually put a dry setup on. I didn't check the weather.
Yeah, possibly.
He was really struggling in the wet.
Yeah, I think I did a little bit of... I watched a little bit of the start of the race, actually, before we came into this. And Eduk obviously started on pole position. And he fell to, I think it was 6th position he was in by the end of lap 2. He dropped through the field so quickly. So, yeah, that's really a high possibility from that one as well. But the top 3 ended up being in that race 3 of the main 4 championship protagonists in the end, really, didn't it? So Bree ended up winning the race, from Ben JS in 2nd and Tun 3rd. Coming into that race, obviously, I mentioned that Eduk was going to be one of the championship protagonists. Did you think that those 3 were going to be up there as well, or did any of those guys surprise you?
I mean, with a lot of the guys coming down from D2, you already knew that fighting towards the top for the lads who were in D3 the season before is going to be very difficult. And I mean, you saw it throughout the season, like the lads from D3 last season, results were few and far between for us to really take a massive fight to those that dropped down from D2.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't put it better, honestly. But after the first race, so those 3 ended up being the main championship protagonists. 4th in that race in the end was actually Starjar. So Starjar got off to a brilliant start to the season. Unfortunately for him, it didn't quite go his way the rest of the season too. He had a couple of good results, but unfortunately Starjar finished the championship down in 13th. So he got off to a good start, but it didn't quite go his way in the end. Hardy also got off to a good start as well. He ended up 5th in the first race. He was obviously running under Kursk at the time. Just speaking on Hardy, really, how do you think... Did you expect kind of more from Hardy this season, or do you think that where he was like in the first race in 5th, kind of on his own, was really kind of honestly, a precursor for the season?
Honestly, I'll say this now. Hardy, to me, has been the biggest shock of the season. Like, the improvement he's had from last season. It's like at the end of the season, he got 2 podiums in the final 2 rounds. He carried that momentum on into this season, and out of every single person from D3 last season, he's the only one with a win to his name, and that speaks volumes.
Yeah, Yeah, that definitely does speak volumes that he's the only one from D3 last season that's been able to take a race victory.
I think he's also the only one with a pole to his name as well.
I think, yeah, just looking through the list of pole positions, I think he is. Yeah, I think he is the only one actually that also picked up a pole position as well. So he's definitely improved quite a lot from last season to this one. So God only knows where he's going to be next season. He could improve even more and end up being at the front of D3. You don't know really, do you? But moving on from Australia, we move on to a completely different race in the end, really, which was Bahrain. So Bahrain was, again, it was Eduque on pole, but this time it was only on pole by about 0.03 of a second, I believe. So it was a much closer field this time round. But the Bahrain race, quite, I think, untypical for Bahrain in that it was a relatively tame race in the end. I think apart from Tun getting damaged pretty early on in the race and having to work his way back through the field, the race was pretty much dominated by Eduk at that point, and he really got his championship off to a brilliant start from there. So, kind of, Ivor, talk us through your kind of perspective of that race and what you had going on in that one, and yeah, basically what you saw.
Well, I didn't last too long in that one. I think I made it like maybe 3 or 4 laps before I DNF'd.
Yeah.
It was a stupid mistake from me, turned in too early at the final corner, just drifted into the wall. I was actually laughing about it because I hit the wall at such a slow speed, and the fact that my wheel fell off, it was hilarious to me.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm actually just looking at the championship results. You ended up DNFing from the first 4 races, so the start of the season obviously didn't go too well for you, unfortunately. But looking at the top 3 from the second race of the standings, actually, so 2 of the top 3 in the race in Bahrain actually are no longer racing in League of Europe, unfortunately. So it was Eduk that ended up winning the race. DJ Williamson finished second. That was his equal highest performance of the season. He repeated a second place later on in the season as well. And third place in that race was Tiggerby. So it was a real mix of people on the podium. 3 people that it was a completely different top 3 to the top 3 that it was before. And in fact, the highest finishing of the top 4 of the first 3 in the first race in Australia and Bahrain was Bree. He managed to end up 4th. But Ben, at that point, DNF'd from Bahrain, and Tun only finished down in 12th with 1 point and the fastest lap point. So just goes to show how quickly the results changed from the top 3 having really, really good results in the first race to completely falling down the grid for the second one.
Yeah, and that just goes to show how competitive the grid was. Like, you at the start of the season, you couldn't really predict who's going to be on the podium.
Yeah, it was definitely very hard to try and pick out a definite podium finisher or a consistent podium finisher at that point. But moving on from Bahrain, we move on to China, and this is where Packer can finally get his. He can kind of chime in a little bit now, because Packer, obviously you didn't. he hasn't gone yet, because obviously Packer, you weren't here for the first 2 races. You weren't really part of League of Europe at that point, and then you joined for your first race in China. Obviously, you know how China ended up for you. You ended up finishing, unfortunately, with no points after a bit of an unlucky start to the race, I'd say. But from your perspective, what did you kind of learn from the China race? Who, out of the light on the grid, who did you think was fast from that one?
Well, obviously Benji, I'm pretty sure he won the race.
He did, yeah.
Yeah, wasn't very close, I don't think. Tun, I thought he was quick. He got second. And then just, yeah, I don't know really else what to say about it. I didn't see really anybody except for maybe James after a pit stop, but that was really it. 14th basically the entire race, and just first lap incident, no safety car.
Yeah, I can imagine for your first race of the season as well, that's probably pretty demotivating for the first race of the season to come straight in and then end up finishing way down the field in 14th. How did you kind of bounce back from that one, do you think, from China? How did you kind of change your mindset for the next race?
I just had to forget about it, just move on, try and think about the next race, which was Spain, and then try and remotivate myself and try and get a good result.
Yeah, absolutely. Championship wise as well in that one, so the top 2 for that race was again Ben and Tun. Ben and Tun were back on the podium after that race. Bree ended up 4th in that race for the second race in a row, and the other podium finisher for that race was Jay Luke. So Luke, who ended up 9th in the standings, got a third place finish in China. But at this point, it's kind of started to emerge that it was really a 3-horse race, really, wasn't it? Between Ben, Bree, and Ton, they were the most consistent finishers at this point. Unfortunately, Ben with a DNF in Bahrain and Ton with only 2 points, but they were the most consistently high-scoring drivers at that point in the season. So, at that point in the season, Ivor, who did you kind of think was going to be the one to look out for out of Ben, Bree, and Ton? Who did you kind of had your money on at that point?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say I was always going to back Ton.
Yeah.
And that because he was my teammate. But there was one person who I was always thinking in the back of my head, if he gets it together, he could be a championship contender, and that was Educt.
Yeah, absolutely, because he had such good pace at the start of the season. He absolutely did.
And of course, like, you know, obviously China lap 1 wasn't very, very nice. I had to try and pick my way through the carnage that Parker alluded to just a minute ago. But yeah, there was another incident which should have been a safety car with
I 100% agree.
with me and Bag of Bones, and you can watch it back on stream, and Bones, I think, makes a little bit of contact with, I can't remember who he was fighting with, but spins it and just rolls onto the inside. And yeah, me doing double duty in that race, commentating as well as racing.
Yeah, that's another thing we have to add into that, is that you and Ton, both house drivers, were commentating whilst the race was happening as well. So you had driver's eye perspective of that crash.
Yes, and I believe my words were, "Oh, just because I couldn't spray." I was trying to keep it professional. I didn't want to drop any F-bombs, and that. You know, the worst I would have gone was, "Oh, bugger."
Oh gosh, I can imagine that's probably pretty stressful commentating and racing at the same time. But yeah. Moving on from China though, we'll move on to Spain. We'll move through these a little bit quicker from now on. But from Spain onwards, this is a race that Ben didn't start in this race, unfortunately. So this was a good opportunity for the likes of Bree and Ton and Educ as well to gain points on Ben at this point in the championship. And it worked out for Educ. He ended up winning the race. Ton finished 3rd and Bree ended up finishing 5th. So Ton and Bree were very consistent at this point in the season. Luke ended up finishing on the podium again at Spain as well. He finished in 2nd in the other Williams car. But this was kind of a pattern really for Ben at the start of the season, wasn't it? He had a good result, and then it would really fluctuate at the start of the season. He really didn't really get into his gear, into the mode that he was in at the end of the season until halfway through. So that was kind of his downfall really at the start of the season, wasn't it?
Well, that's one thing that you know, a lot of people like have kind of given credit to Ben this season. Just how consistent he's actually been able to be this season compared to what he was last season.
Yeah,
so I think he was pretty inconsistent last season, and it carried over a little bit at the start of the season. But once he started to, you know, get his feet in there and, you know, just go about his race, and, you know, the consistency came for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Spain was in the end a relatively uneventful race. In the end, but obviously with Educ winning the race. Paco, you can talk us through your perspective, because you ended up finishing in the points in that race. I believe in 6th place you finished that race. So kind of, how did your race go for Spain really?
Well, the first thing I have to mention about Spain was that was the first race after the safety car update. So there was 3 safety cars, 2 virtual safety cars. It was a crazy race.
Yeah, and that was to close the last one.
From my point of view, it was either you're in a DRS train or you're just trying to catch up to the back of a DRS train, and that's all it was really.
Yeah, because even though there were a number of safety cars, they were for kind of isolated incidents really, weren't they? So that was kind of the story of the safety car update, unfortunately. But Yeah, that's kind of what it was. But that was your first point score of the season. We'll move on to Monaco, and I think we probably want to hear Packer's POV for this one because I imagine he probably has a lot to say about the Monaco race.
Oh no.
But we'll just quickly run through the top three from that way. So Ton ended up winning that race. That was his first race win of the season, and he ended up being the fourth different driver to win a race in the fifth round of the season at Monaco. So he won the race from Ben JS, who was in second. Third place in the end went to someone who's escaped my mind. It went to Tiggerby, actually. Tiggerby came third, despite a couple of incidents in that race. Tiggerby still ended up in third with the fastest lap. He really, yeah. That was a case of Monaco was a real case of Tiggerby and Eduk bottling an easy win because Eduk was on pole by an absolute country mile. He was so fast in Monaco. And he DNF'd
Sixth in D1, by the way.
Yeah, he would have been. Yeah, he would have been sixth in D1 with his qualifying time, but he ended up DNFing from the race after a couple of incidents. And Tiggerby would have taken over the lead at that point, and he had a pretty comfortable lead. And then he got involved in some incidents himself, and ended up finishing third. So that was a case of those two really ruining chances of winning. But Packer, talk us through your perspective of the Monaco race.
The start of the race, I had a pretty average start, to say, and then I got a tap from behind, and Cam was able to get side by side with me up the hill. I let him through because I didn't want to risk anything. It's Monaco, it's a long race. You never know where opportunities are, so I let him through. And then there's a VSC, and when we got back underway, I think Cam hit the wall almost every lap at the back and just kept getting wing damage and was holding the entire field up. So I think Ivor was in that train. Ivor and Ton were right behind me and Cam in that train. And then I think I got wing damage off of Cam to back again, and we both pit, and I think DJ Williamson pit with us. And then that just let the two Haas drivers go and use their pace.
Yeah, absolutely. You can talk us through that kind of perspective as well, Ivor, because bizarrely Monaco was the first race you ended up finishing, so...
yeah, of all the places.
Of all the places to have your first race finish of the season is at Monaco. But you definitely talked about team strategy before we started this. So you talked about team strategy for Haas at Monaco. How did you kind of work that one out with Ton and ended up helping Ton win the race?
Right, well, me and Tom, we were stuck behind Parker, we were stuck behind Cam. We didn't know at that time he had that much wing damage. We just was like, why is he driving like that? Like, he's just understeering absolutely everywhere. It didn't click in my head for quite a while, but when they both pitted, I think Tiggerby had he had pretty much a pit stop advantage at that point, and Eduk, I think, had got a wing damage and had the pit early, so he came out in the train that was caused by Cam. Yeah. So it was like, alright, Ton, you're in the championship battle. How do you want me to play this by ear? Do you want me to try and hold everyone up, give you a gap? Yes, okay. Let's do this. So I was driving at about 80% of what I could at Monaco. And I was doing a pretty decent job. Ton managed to get himself a pretty decent gap and, just got bad traction out of Novell chicane. Ben JS down my inside into the back. Two cars into that corner just do not work. And Ben JS understeers into me, and I understeer into the wall, wing damage, and it is what it is. But I helped my teammate get the gap that he needed, so he's got no pressure from behind. Yeah,
absolutely, and that obviously played off brilliantly. And at this point in the championship as well, Ton had started to lead Ton had led the championship at this point, and he'd scored 4 podiums out of the first 5 races. So he had a really, really good start to the season, did Ton. And it looks like he was starting to edge away. Bree was consistently finishing down in 4th and 5th, and Ben was either finishing on the podium or not finishing the race at all. So Tom was having a really, really good start. We move on to Canada, and one person that can give us a really, really good review of Canada, again, is Packer, because Packer became the 5th different race winner of the season in the 6th round at Canada. So talk us through your perspective of that race, because that was kind of a battle with the 2 racing points in that one.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. It was me and Tiger, and then Ricardo, I don't know where he started, but he started somewhere in the midfield, and he was really quick to get through, and almost with us. So, first stint, Tiger got wing damage, and I know he had to fix that. So I pit, he was like 5-ish seconds behind me, And the second stint, I got wing damage, and I had to fix that. And then it was just about the penalty game in the third stint, trying to keep your penalties low and then create the gap that you need.
Yeah, and it ended up paying off for you. Obviously, that was your first win of the season. From that point, kind of in the championship, you had obviously so you started the championship relatively late, and Spain and Monaco didn't really go the way that you initially hoped. But surely the Canada race gave you a lot more confidence going into the rest of the season.
Yeah, it completely like rejuvenated my motivation to do anything in League of Europe. Like, got the win, and I was like, okay, let's go for a good position in the championship.
Yeah, because obviously at this point you were kind of quite far behind Bree, Ton, and Ben. A number of people actually as well. So the likes of Hardy, and obviously this is the first race where Eduk obviously didn't take part because Eduk got moved up to D2 because of his pace. Unfortunately, Eduk's season in D2 didn't really get off the ground, unfortunately. But yeah, this was kind of the turning point for your season, like you said. So you obviously ended up winning that race. From second place finished Ricardo. He ended up finishing second in that race, and third place was Tiger. The two racing points getting a double podium. But just a note on the championship coming into that one as well. Ton had a pretty poor qualifying, and he tried to make up for it in the race. His race was a bit up and down, and he only ended up scoring 9 points in the end. That was a sixth place finish with the fastest lap. But he still outscored Ben and Bree, who had actually worse races in the end. Bree didn't finish at all, and Ben only ended up scoring 4 points. So at this point, it was just Ton making the best of a bad situation, really, wasn't it? And then coming into France, Ton ended up winning in France again. So Ton was, other than Eduk, he was the first full-time D3 driver to get a double win in the season. So kind of either from your perspective in the championship, obviously you're Ton's teammate, you obviously get an insider info into the season as it goes on. What was kind of Ton's perspective, do you think, coming out of France after having a pretty big championship lead at that point?
Well, when it came to the early rounds, Tom wasn't really like backing himself entirely. There was like a bit of self-doubt and that there. He was like Spain, like the safety car coming out at the end. Monaco, Tigger B bottling it. Canada, he had a lot of contact with Tigger B towards the end.
Yeah.
Which, didn't help him. And France, he'd say that the safety car at the end also helped him there as well. And I think that was the thing, like, he was, in his head, he was like, I am getting incredibly lucky, but how long is this going to last?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was probably the case for the first part of the season for him, definitely. But obviously you make your own luck in League of Europe, and he put himself in those positions to end up giving himself a really, really big commanding championship lead. But coming out of France, coming into Austria was where the tide started to change a little bit. So Ton ended up not starting that race. Bree only scored 8 points in that one, so he wasn't able to close in too much on Ton. But Ben ended up scoring a second place finish after having a relatively difficult start to the race. And that was Hardy's first and only win of the season as well. He became the sixth different driver to win a race that season. So that was kind of the turning point really for Ben, wasn't it? Round 8 at Austria.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. Like, Austria, moving forward, something just clicked in Ben's head. And he just started to get things right. You look at his consistency after Austria compared to the start of the season, like, it was on another level. Like, he was always in those positions. He was always up there.
Yeah.
Always a name that could have been either there for the race win, but he was always a name that was definitely a good shout for the podium.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from Austria onwards, Ben didn't finish out the points at all. He didn't have a DNF, he didn't have a DNS, he didn't have a disqualification of any sort. He finished in the points in every single race from Austria onwards, just to show how consistent he was in the second half of the season. I think we'll move on from Austria. Obviously, Hardy ended up winning that race in the McLaren. It was a good race for McLaren overall. Pease ended up finishing third in that race. That was a good case of McLaren teamwork in the end. And that was
Pease bottling it.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of a case really for P's season, really. In the end, wasn't it? We were discussing it earlier. P's entered 13 races and he only ended up finishing 3. And 2 of the races that he finished, he ended up in the top 4. So it's kind of a season of what could have been for P's, really. But moving on to Britain, this is when we got our second full-time driver that ended up being a double race winner. And Packer, that was your second race win. Unfortunately, your last race win in the season, but your second race win. How did Britain go for you? Because I think me and Ivor are definitely in agreement that Britain's probably our favourite race of the season for D3. Was it? I think, obviously for certain reasons, it's probably one of your favourites as well. But was that kind of how you felt coming out of that race?
Honestly, I didn't even feel like it was a fully deserved win because of the late safety car. And then Ricardo making mistakes on the last lap, but I enjoyed it, to say the least. I guess.
Yeah, we could definitely say from your POV, if anyone ever goes back and goes onto Packer's YouTube channel, please watch the end of the D3 race at Silverstone, because his reaction to the race win is just pure gold. It's so just so joyous and so happy, but so funny at the same time, and it was such a joy to watch. It definitely was.
Cringy to watch back.
I can imagine it's probably a little bit embarrassing to watch it back, but if anyone does, please watch that. That was so brilliant. Yeah, moving on from Great Britain, obviously the podium finishes from Great Britain. Obviously, Packer won that race in the end. Second place, I don't even know who second place went to in that one. It went to Tun again. Yeah. Tun ended up on the podium again, and third place in his first race in the championship was Storm. So Storm ended up joining the championship at round 9 at Great Britain, and that's another person we'll just have a little word on. Storm had a pretty decent start to his campaign, and when he joined the season, he had 2 third place finishes to start off his campaign. But from then on, he DNF'd from pretty much all of the remaining races in the season. He only ended the season on 50 points in the end. So it's kind of another person of a season that kind of what could have been for Storm. What do you think was his downfall in the end?
I think it was usually something that would happen early in the race that would drop one of what I would consider the top guys down into the midfield, and a lot of the time you just couldn't get back through. There was just no survival of that midfield, and a lot of times it led to either no points because you had to make an extra pit stop for wing damage or something, or accumulating too many penalties because you're overdriving the car, or you just pushing it a bit too much and you end up DNFing. And it's a story of what it was like racing in the midfield. I know Park has been he's been in the midfield and I'll try to fight his way through a few times, and we'll probably get on to one of the races a bit later where you can discuss that. But it's one of those things, like, the midfield is just, it was a different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with you on that one, that the midfield was definitely, once you fell into the midfield, it was really hard to get out of it, which was, I think that was really the turning point for Ben's season, really, wasn't it? Because every time he was in the midfield, whether it was poor qualifying or he was caught in the midfield through pit strategy, he was always able to work his way back to the front, which was something that many other people struggled with in the end. But yeah, from championship standings, Germany, we got our next different race winner, which was Ricardo. He ended up winning with the fastest lap in Germany, a pretty dominant win in the end. He won from Ben, and this was the start of Ben's 5-race podium streak, where he was not outside of the top 2 for 5 races in a row, and that was the turning point. As soon as that started, that chain of the results started, I don't think there was really any going back for anyone in the championship, really, was there?
No, I mean, over the next few races, he chewed into that lead that they had, and then it was game over for men.
Yeah, absolutely. You got anything to add, Packer?
That podium streak just put him, like, there was no way anybody else was catching him. Like, besides Russia, where he finished 4th, which is 1 spot off the podium, he would have had 7 podiums in a row if he didn't finish outside the podium in Russia.
Yeah.
And he was very close to it.
Yeah, I mean, in the remaining, from Germany all the way to the end, he only finished off the podium twice in the last 9 rounds of the season, which is just incredible consistency. And like you say, the one time he finished off the podium in Russia was a 4th, so it was only 1 place off. In Mexico, he only ended up with 6 points in the end. But yeah, it just goes to show the incredible consistency he had at the end of the season. We're just going to fly through a couple of the races. We're going to move on probably more one of the highlight races of the season. This race is nominated for best D3 best race of the season in the awards category for D3, which is Italy. Italy ended up being won by Callum, I believe. So Callum joined the season midway through, and that was another person. Yeah,
Germany, right?
Yeah, he joined in Germany. He did, yeah. And that was a kind of an interesting addition because he got moved down from D2 and he came in to D3 and hit the ground running, didn't he? Really, with some really good qualifying and race results. Sandbagging deliberately to get moved down. But yeah, what were your guys' thoughts on the Italy race? Because obviously it's nominated for race of the season, but I think Ivor and I, probably Packer as well, probably disagree with that. But kind of what's your opinion on the Italy race?
It was an interesting one. My qualifying was a weird one because I didn't look at the weather till like halfway through the session. So I had a dry setup on, and my wheel uncalibrated on lap 1, which was a letdown because it was pretty high up. And then just incidents, penalties, and then a late safety car just shook it up a lot and kind of destroyed Ben's win, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ivy, have you got anything to add to that? I know that your wheel, I think, uncalibrated as well. So both of you kind of had the same experience in Italy.
Yeah, same experience. Thing was, like, you know, I didn't last too long. I just could not get on the throttle on the brakes at all. It was too much. And as soon as I was about to be a lap down, because I had to pit again, I just thought, okay, I'm just going to retire in the pits.
Yeah. Definitely fair enough. Obviously a bit of a struggle for Italy, but yeah, it's obviously nominated for best race of the season. It was definitely chaotic at the end, obviously with all the carnage we had on the final laps and Ben trying to work his way back through to the front of the field after a little bit of a mistake. It still ended up with a second place in the end, so we actually recovered pretty well. And third went to Tun, which doesn't sound too bad for Tun, but this is his first podium since Great Britain after 2 DNSs and a DNF, so his championship from Germany onwards fell apart with those 2 DNSs, and he kind of lost his rhythm, really, didn't he?
Yeah, like midway through the season, when he started missing races, and Ben started to get his confidence, that was when it was the big game changer. Just because you can't. Momentum is such a key thing in racing. I mean, we've seen it in pretty much every single division. Like, you know, Lewis in D1 had massive momentum. You had Gary in D2 that had massive momentum at one point.
Yeah.
You had Ben towards the mid-season towards the end, and in D4 you had Ryan towards the end of the season. Like, momentum is such a difficult thing to stop, and once someone gets that momentum and the confidence, it's difficult to beat them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's definitely something that Tun and Bree at that point in the championship had lost as well, because obviously Bree had a string of relatively poor results after being caught up in some incidences, unfortunately, and that's where his championship kind of fell by the wayside as well. We'll move on though to another highlight of the season. I'd say is probably Singapore. That was definitely a very interesting race, and that was the introduction of another new person into the division, and that was Wesker. Wesker, just to point out how brilliant of an end to the season Wesker had. Wesker entered 5 of the last 6 rounds and won 3 of them, and finished second in the other one and second in one of them and 4th in the other one. So he had a brilliant end to the season, did Wesker. He was definitely a good addition. He's probably going to be moved up to D2 with the pace that he had. But I think, Packer, do you want to talk us through your POV? Because I know that in the end Singapore was pretty frustrating for you.
Yeah, it was very frustrating. Like the first, like the first half of the race, I thought it was gonna be, like I was gonna be at the front the entire race, but I just wasn't in the end. I was making a lot of good moves after my pit stop, and I was the only one really making it through the field, out of the front runners. And then there was a safety car, and the rain kind of screwed me over.
Yeah, I think I actually pointed it out one in the D3 stream as well, was that you ended up falling out nearly outside of the points after your pit stop, but Ben obviously picked up damage trying to overcut you and fell behind Bree, and you ended up working your way back up to 4th before obviously the rain came down and the safety car came out. And I think it was Hardy in the end, who was the second person on the same strategy as you, and you hadn't overtaken a single person and was still down in about 10th or 11th. So your performance up to that point was impeccable. But yeah, obviously the rain came down and really kind of put a dampener on things, to, if you pardon the pun. That's the worst joke I've ever said in my life. So we'll just add that one in as well. But yeah, from Singapore, obviously Wesker won the race with the fastest lap, and that's another thing from Wesker as well. Wesker had a couple of incidents actually in the Singapore race where he fell to the back of the grid, whether that was through damage or through contact with someone else, and he still managed to work his way back to the front of the field and win that race. So that was just a brilliant result from him. Ben came home with a second place again, so obviously that's his second place finish in a row. So he was capitalising on a relatively poor race, really. And third in that race ended up going to, I believe, was it Starjar in the end? So it was Starjar that ended up third in that one, and that was his only podium of the season for the Ferrari driver. Unfortunately, Starjar didn't really take part in the rest of the season from that point onwards. From Singapore, though, we'll move on to Russia. Again, I know Ethan's going to have a lot to say about this one, but Ivor, we'll talk to you about your perspective really for Russia. What was kind of your perspective? Because I know that you two were kind of locked in that midfield battle that we've mentioned so many times already, that this review, that you guys were really locked in that battle.
Oh, well, Russia for me, it started with me bottling quali. I only got one decent lap, and it was good enough for... Just gonna have a look at my quality position, but yeah, it was good enough for 12th in the end. And then I got absolutely smashed up the rear into turn 2 and had to make an early pit stop, and then it was just trying to fight my way back for the field. And yeah, we got into a good battle with Parker for a few laps, knowing what Parker was infamous for, because I have to look at all of his dive bombs every time I do a top 5 for T3. So I'm just well aware of what Parker can do if he's capable of making that dive. So just position the car just to not allow it to happen. But there was an instant with me and Parker where I still maintain a bit of desync must have been involved, because as Parker got past me with DRS, on his screen he doesn't touch me. On my screen he does tag my my front left, and it unsettles me under braking, and I go into the back rim, which was hard enough to give me wing damage, but I didn't get any.
Oh,
that's why I think there was a lot of desync involved in it. And yeah, me and Parker both lost 2 places because of it. And of course, like I'm gonna let Parker through. Like it's simple as that. That's good sportsmanship. That if you go into the back of someone, you gotta let them back through, no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
After that, I think me and Parker, we got stuck in like a little 5-man train for P8, I think it was, or P9, something like that.
Bottom end of the top 10.
Yeah, and then there was an incident then, and I think Parker had a better view of it of me because Goldie was blocking my entire view of it.
Yeah, it was just 3 wide in the 3rd sector, and that doesn't really go. I tried to make the best out of it, and it ended up costing me wing damage and just not pitting because I was frustrated, and ended up DNFing.
Yeah, that was definitely a chaotic race to say the least. With that battle, I think it was it like Sir James? I think that was in that battle as well.
James, DJ.
Yeah, I think it was Parker, DJ, and James 3 wide. James had spun it. Goldie was directly in front of me, so I couldn't see that James had spun it until I got around the corner, obviously. straight into him. It's too late in the race. There's no way I'm getting anything out of it if I pit.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing about it was that I managed to get a point out of it, but only because of Parker's DNF.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much understeer, man. There's just so much understeer.
We already know your opinions on the Russia track, I think. I'm definitely in agreement with you on that one, that Russia is...
I will say though, if that incident didn't happen, I was on for P6 because I had no penalties.
Well, you can thank Ethan for that one later.
Very bad track, very bad track.
Yeah, but just a note on the championship as well. Obviously, we mentioned Ben finishing 4th in that race, but at this point, his championship was sewn up. Bree and Tun's championship had really kind of stalled out at this point. And from Russia onwards, Tun unfortunately did not take part in the rest of the season. I think at this point, Tun had realised that the championship had gone. And I kind of think he gave up, really, and he didn't really want to take part in the last 4 races, which is fair enough. But in the end, we ended up having a battle for the Division 3.5 championship, as I'd like to call it, because obviously Ben ended up winning the championship by a country mile in the end. But it was a battle between Tun, Bree, and yourself, Packer. And in the last 4 races, your championship really came alive in the last 4 races. So kind of talk us through that string of podiums you had at the end of the season.
Yeah, I had four podiums in a row to just finish off the season. In Japan, it was like a whole tsunami, man. It was wet the entire race, and yeah, I was able to keep it on the road, but Ben just absolutely dominated. He won by like should have been almost 30 seconds to me, and got third. I think it was Wesker.
Yeah, Wesker. No, it was Callum. Callum ended up in 3rd in that race.
Callum, yeah. And it was honestly kind of a boring race for, I'm guessing, the top 3. The Mexico, it was dry most of the way through, and it was supposed to rain, like I'm pretty sure halfway through, and the rain didn't come till lap 32. And so I based my entire strategy off the rain coming halfway through, and then I had to pit again for mediums, and it just kind of sent me back through the field. I had to make overtakes, and I just destroyed my tires, and then the inners came, and I just got a penalty on the last lap and threw away the chance of a win.
Yeah, moving on from Mexico, though, I'd say USA was another highlight race for you. In the end, it was Tiger that ended up winning that race. That was Tiger's only race win of the season. Yeah, Tiger had shown obviously really good pace throughout the season, but it just hadn't really materialised for him in a race. USA was kind of the first time that happened for him, and that's where Tiger became the 10th different race winner of the season, which is just crazy to think about. But from your perspective as well, I know I don't think I was commentating at the time. I think I might have been in a party with you while that race was happening.
It was Mark and Killer.
It was, yeah, the Ferrari guys that were covering for me while my internet was shitting itself. But I I think I was in a party with you while that race was going on, and it was just a kind of another real case of what happened in Mexico and what happened in Japan, really, wasn't it? Where you kind of had the race win and not been in that race, you would have dominated the race, but the winner ended up dominating even further, really.
Yeah. Well, if Tiger wasn't there, I don't think I would have dominated it, because I was in the midfield after the lap 1 safety car, just trying to make my mediums last the entire race, and then late safety car from was it just Chris who crashed in the pit lane? I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, I can't remember who that was either.
Late safety car, like two laps to fight it out, and just was able to get a move on Benjay done and a move on Callum done, and then it was like P3 on the road I finished, and then P2 because of penalties.
Yeah, and then obviously we're running a little bit low on time, actually, so what we'll do is we'll just move straight on really to the last race of the season, which was obviously Brazil. Brazil was another pretty topsy-turvy race in the end. There was a real mix of strategies. It was obviously wet throughout that race as well, which we had a number of this season. We had a number of wet races this season, and Brazil was one of them. And it was a good way to finish off the championship in the end, really, wasn't it? With Wesker pretty much dominating that race from start to finish. I don't think Wesker lost the lead at any point in that race, even through pit stops. But after that, behind you, obviously, Ethan, you were in the battle for the podium positions. Yeah, what was your POV of that race?
Well, there was again another safety car that completely shook up the race, and I pitted on the full wets because the rain was supposed to get harder, and it just didn't. And I had to make a pit stop while under safety car, and that threw me all the way down to the back of the field. And then I just had to make moves with the spray. It just didn't really happen, but I guess people got penalties somehow, and I finished 3rd from like 7th on track.
Yeah, and that was obviously pretty crucial for you, because you and Bree were obviously locked in a battle for P2 in the standings in the end, and with P's relatively poor result and spinning behind the safety car, you capitalised on it and ended up beating Bree to 2nd in the championship. So You won Division 3.5, but with the standings, obviously after the season's finished, so just running through the standings, and we'll run you through who ended up finishing in the top 10 in the standings. So Ben J won this championship in the end by 99 points, which is just incredible to think about how many points ahead he is. He's literally almost a point away from being 4 race wins clear of Packer in second, which is just crazy to think about. So obviously Packer, you took second in the standings ahead of Bree in third. Tun ended up fourth. Hardy in fifth. Wesker, only taking part in 5 races, ended up sixth in the standings. Tiger was 7th, Callum was 8th, the 2 racing point drivers. J. Luke 9th, a pretty consistent season for him, and then Ricardo was in 10th. Cool, yeah, so another little segment that we're going to do just before we wrap up, obviously the Season 3 review. We've got a little, we've decided like our best, like our 5 top moments of the season really. So we've gone for 5 categories. So we've gone for our surprise of the season, the biggest bottle of the season is probably what we're going to say. Most improved throughout the season, whether that's from last season to this season or just throughout the season in general. And then from all of our different perspectives, what our best moment of the season was and what our worst moment of the season was. So which one of you guys wants to start us off with surprise?
Go on, Pack. I'll let you go first.
Okay. My surprise of the season, I guess in a bad way, was Storm. Because he had a really good start, and I raced him in previous leagues, and he was really quick. He was around my pace, especially on this game. And then he just kind of fell off and didn't finish a lot. So I guess that's my surprise of the season.
Yeah, Ivor, what was your surprise of the season?
Well, I was just thinking in my head between 2, but I'm going to go with my original placement and say DJ, because honestly, I didn't expect him to pick up a couple of podiums, so I was surprised at it. He managed to do it a few times, so fair play to DJ on that one.
Yeah, fair play to him. Fair enough. My surprise, from my perspective, the season is probably going to go to Tiger, actually. Just because watching Tiger throughout the season, how many poles he got, with 5 pole positions, more than anyone else by pretty much a country mile. And then just not having the races to back it up, really. I was really surprised. He had brilliant pace in qualifying, and was never really able to back it up in race conditions. So that's probably why he's going to get my surprise of the season, I'd say, in a bad way, unfortunately. Please don't at me at any point, Tiger. But we'll move on to the next category. So, biggest bottle of the season. I have a feeling we might all have the same answer for this one, but Packer, will go to you first. Who's biggest bottle for you?
It has to be Total Peace. It totally has to be Total Peace. He did 13 races, only finished 3 of them. I mean, his results were really good when he did finish, but just the DNFs.
Yeah, Ivor, have you got the same, or you got someone different?
Well, it's only between 2 people, and it's between me and Total Peace. But here's the thing, I mean, what I would consider bottling it is if you lose it on your own from a good position. And throughout the season, I don't think I've been in as many good positions as what Total Peace has been in.
Yeah.
So I would say that Total Peace has definitely bottled it in the terms of actually bottling it more than me. But just because I have a feeling that you're also going to say Peas, I'll just say me to keep it even.
Well, actually, yeah, I'm unfortunately sorry, Peas. But I've also gone for Peas for biggest bottle of the season as well. Like you said, he took part in 13 races and only finished 3 of the ones he entered. But of the 3 he entered, he had a 3rd and a 4th. So he had really good results when he did finish. So it just goes to show what results he could have got had he ended up finishing races, which is just a shame really for Peas. But hopefully next season, if he is racing next season, then he can improve on that and maybe have a bit more consistent results. We'll move on to the next category then. So 3rd category is most improved. So Paco, who do you think who's going to take most improved for you?
Well, I really wasn't here for last season.
Yeah.
So I just had to take a little bit of advice from Ivor, and I said Hardy because of his pace last season compared to this season, and especially being 5th in the championship or ending up 5th in the championship this season. He's definitely improved a lot.
Yeah, so I imagine Ivor, you've probably gone for the same thing as well with Hardy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, out of the guys from D3 last season, Hardy might not have been the first name that would have been thrown up to really take it to the guys that came down from D2, but I mean, as I said earlier, he's the only person out of the D3 lads last season to get a pole and a race win. And
Yeah.
his improvement from last season to the end of this season has been fantastic, and now he's actually learning wheels, so we'll see how good he can get for the new game on that. So
Yeah,
we'll
could
wait
be.
and see, but
Be a real threat maybe. But yeah, I think most improved. I've gone for Hardy as well, just based purely on pretty much the same reasons actually, that he's the only D3 driver from last season to pick up a race win and a pole this season. But I'm going to give a shout out to Callum as well, just because Callum dropped from D2. He was at the back of the D2, struggling for pace, struggling for racecraft really. He dropped into D3 and hit the ground running really, and had some really decent results. He had 2 wins and 2 other. Yeah.
You can tell you're choking on that sand, man.
So did someone use one? I thought I heard someone say sandbagging. Did anyone use? Oh, sure.
Oh gosh, but yeah, he ended up picking up 2 other podium positions as well from that one. We are going to get absolutely roasted by people from this one, but yeah, just a shout out for Callum for that one as well. That I think bringing him down to D3 kind of helped him improve his racecraft and hone his racecraft in a bit more as well, and he got some good results out of it. So shout out to him. We'll move on to the next category, which is best moment of the season from each person's perspective. So, Packer, from your perspective, what was your best moment of the season?
Well, okay, I'm gonna say my best and my worst right now because they kind of go together.
Fair
So
enough.
my best moment of the season was the first half of the Singapore race. I felt so amazing. I was so confident I was gonna win the race, and then the worst moment of the season happened. The second half of the Singapore race happened. So it was a complete disaster, the second half. Just spun, getting into incidents, couldn't get past anybody. It was just chaos. It was terrible for me.
Fair enough. Either from your perspective then, what was your best and worst moment of the season?
Oh, my best moment of the season's gotta be the brilliant freeway battle between me, Parker, and Ricky for the race win on track at Silverstone. I mean, it was such a good battle and that clean racing throughout, and just that drag race to the line between Parker and Ricky and I was brilliant.
Yeah, that was definitely a real highlight of the season. What was your worst moment, would you say?
France.
Just the name
France. I had the
France.
pace. I had the pace at France. I could have got an easy podium there, but I got a ticker beat.
Not add one to the list. I think a number of people have got Tiggerbead this season. That's just going to be the new phrase for it, isn't it? Any final thoughts from you guys on the season that we haven't covered so far, or anything you want to add before we wrap up the season review?
Not really.
Ethan's like, end it. I want to be out of here.
For a day.
I'd say Pete's in a bigger bottle job than me.
I'm going to put that in as well. I'm going to say Damon's a big bottle job. I know Damon's going to watch this.
I agree with that one.
He's going to watch this, waiting for mine and Ethan's opinion on him, and he's just going to wait to the very end to realise that we're just going to call him a bottle. But there you go, Damon. There's your shout out.
France win. Bottle the win.
But yeah, that's where we're going to end the review, guys. So we will see you next season. We've obviously got about a 4-week break until the new game comes out. We've got the Eurasia Sprint Cup coming up, so that's something. Yeah, this weekend coming up actually. So that's going to be something that's exciting to look forward to. So hopefully everyone. I don't know if they're being streamed. Are they being streamed? We'll find out.
No idea.
No, yeah, we'll find out when it comes to it. But hopefully they are, and if they are, tune in obviously on the League of Europe channel. They'll definitely be great to watch. Thank you, Packer and Ivor, for joining me. Thanks for listening to me completely ramble on for far too long. But thanks for your guys' inputs, and thank you everyone for tuning in as well. Thank you to all the D3 drivers for racing this season as well, and fingers crossed League of Europe on the new game is even better. So good luck to everyone that's taken part in the Sprint Championship, and we will see you next season. So thank you very much everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Right.